Right, guys. I know I've been away for a little while, been doing other bits and that, but I'm back now. So hopefully the shows will be a lot more regular. And since we started trying to work our way through the evils of serial killers last time, looking at serial killers and are they real? Did they exist? Were they real people or were they teams? Were they groups of people? Since we looked at that, I figured we should get to know who it is they're working for. Not like, not the CIA or looking into the FBI or the big they. We're going to go, above them all, innit? And to the big man on campus, the one they all look up to, the fucking, who everyone else looks down on. The one that's feared by most, he's praised by some. Some say he's quite horny, but he's not always horny. Sometimes he's reptilian, sometimes he's some form of goat. Other times he's more of a dragon, or at least dragon-like. So I guess he's the sinister, scaly satyr fella. But we've got to be careful because if we speak of him, he might pop up. Because this week we're going to look into the devil, what makes him tick, where are his favourite haunts, where does he come from, what's he into. But first, we'll have a song. This is Shotty Horror with Just Might Be Dust. So the information that's out there on the devil is quite misleading, isn't it? And that might be on purpose, The devil might love to cause confusion because from confusion you can get power over people. One person accidentally summons a demon thinking they're the ghost of a dead nan, and all of a sudden the devil's got his foot in the door, Now I reckon first we should think about the devil as you're probably thinking of him right now, He's the antithesis of God. God's Moriarty, God's Mr. Nimbus, God's Gary, God's Agent Smith, God's Xehanort, God's Dr. Nefarious, God's Lord Farquaad, God's Hank, God's Frank Grimes, God's Gargamel, God's Monday, God's Master, God's Joker, God's Darth Vader, God's Voldemort, God's Dark Side, God's upturned plug on the bedroom carpet at night time, God's Megatron, God's Dr. Robotnik, God's Captain Hook, God's Bowser, God's Ganon, God's Ganondorf, God's Scar, God's yellow and black stripy Waldo. Basically, people see the devil as the total opposite for what God stands for. But to understand that, I guess you've got to know what God stands for, and that's completely down to personal interpretation, isn't it? And religious people would probably say that's thanks to God and his gift of what they call free will, which is almost their clever storytelling device that allows them to not know the answers to things. Now, many might argue that God is, he's good, he's all good and true, and only wants what's best for people. Others would say he's a maniac, he's obsessed with himself and only wants admiration and worship from people and is willing to torture those that refuse to give it to him. And I guess in a way both camps are correct, innit? You can't argue with that, both sides are right. But God's all about subservience, do as God wants, use your free will to do as God wants, whereas I guess the devil is more of the school of thought of use your free will, do what you want, and not do what God wants, And people like Jimmy Savile and Alistair Crowley have also tried to push that idea, the do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, which was the Thelemic belief, the order that came from Alistair Crowley. So I suppose you can view them as satanic. Now, the devil also seems to be about subservience though, innit? But it's less sugar-coated, it seems, it's less meet up and sing songs about me in a big hall full of pictures of my face, and more of a, just do it with me in mind, mate, whatever it is you're doing, think of me as you're doing it. Like a pervert might think to themselves on a bus, where they might look at, when you're on a bus and you're a teenager and you look at a girl and you're like, I bet she's going to go home later and fucking squeeze her boobs thinking about me. I reckon that's what the devil's doing. The devil's thinking that. The devil's more like, when you do metaphorically squeeze your boobs, think of me. When you do go and torture a load of people and kill them all and splay them up the walls, think of me, Satan. Don't do it in my name. Don't plaster my name all over the walls. It's a bit much. I don't need that. It's not like I'm God. I'm not Jesus. Just think of me. Have me in your mind, and you're doing it. Because if there were two people, right? Let's say there's two blokes, and they both run their own cults, right? And they both offer eternal life and the threat of damnation if you go too far down the wrong path. Now, both of these fellas want your money. They both want your life. But one of them is constantly shouting at you, telling you to change, but won't tell you how to change, and just expects you to figure it out, whilst the other one's just letting you get on with your own life, and if you happen to fuck it up, you fuck it up. Who are you more likely to think is the sounder of the cult leaders, innit? It's the second guy, it's the devil. You probably are going to side with the devil if you look at him like that. But is the devil his name? Is it his formal title? Is that what would be on his post if he lived in an actual corporeal area, We know God usually gets referred to as Yahweh, but the devil's got loads of names, innit? He's a clever bastard. He's like a man with a load of passports or driving licenses and maybe even some of those wearable tattoo sleeves as well. He's ready for anything. And what's weird is if you ask a load of people to imagine what the Christian God looks like, most of them are probably going to imagine Alanis Morissette. But if you ask a load of people what the devil looks like, they're all going to say someone different. Like my favourite interpretation of the devil would be Richie from Bottom, where he dresses up as the devil and goes trick-or-treating. But other people might imagine that crab creature from the old Powerpuff Girls cartoons. So in case you're thinking, this guy he's talking about don't half sound familiar, but I can't place him, and I thought I'd make a note of some of his names that he's known as around the world. So obviously we've said it before, the devil, Beelzebub, Satan, Baal, the snake, the serpent, Keith, Mephistopheles, Iblis, Venus, Paimon, Vine, Belith, Squippy the Trickster, Diablo, Zagan, or Zagan, Asmodeus, and that's just some of them that we're going to try and cover in this. But there's fucking loads of them, mate. And it's supposed to all be the same guy. But then when you look into it, it's not all the same guy. This was an hard episode to put together because there's just so much on him that it's difficult to be like, well, what's actually right and what's just been made up by someone, to try and be like, oh, I like the idea that people are selling devils, but we can't sell goat sculptures in our culture, so we'll make him into a snake and make the snake evil. And then in other cultures, they might be like, well, the snake's actually quite good, so we won't have him as the snake. We'll have him as a bull riding on a human, fucking whipping a cobra about the place, which will make sense later. But they don't all seem to be the same guy when you do look into it and when you read about them, but they are all devils, if that makes sense. It makes it seem like the role of the devil gets, locumed. Do you know what locum means? Like when veterinary nurses will be locumed. The GPs sometimes are on locum, where they don't have a set office, but they move around and they're all your doctor, but they're not always the same doctor. And I think that's how it works with the devil. I think, maybe you might get visited by a temp worker when you set your candles up sometimes, who just happens to be filling the role in your area. Maybe one ethereal creature is better at whipping than another, whilst maybe this other creature is better at forcing you to rape your siblings, in hell. It's difficult to tell, innit? So let's have a song, and then we'll get into them a bit more. This is Prozac with Sex and Candy. I figured we should look into where the devil comes from. Where did he grow up? What did his mum do? What did his dad do? The sort of things that you'd find on his birth certificate if he had one. And he doesn't have one of those, and he doesn't have a proper record of existence, but neither does God. But there does seem to be more about him, innit? One of the best known origin stories of the devil is that he was a disgruntled employee, somewhere around the area manager level. Maybe he had dominion over some other angels in the county and might have been included in some of the larger meetings, every now and then. But they weren't being organised by him, if that makes sense. Probably both respected and feared, but when God, his boss, decided he wanted to start serving a different race, he got a bit uppity, really. God decided he wanted to increase sales and start offering contracts to what would later become known as humans. The devil, Lucifer, let's call him, thought this seemed a bit like corporate fraud to him, and tried to report God to the anonymous phone number that was on the changing room door in the back of the shop. Now, the anonymity of the call was a lie, because, the omniscience and all that. So hidden deep within the shop's privacy policy, let's call it, they were allowed to record the phone call and report it to the boss. And it turned out Lucifer was just ringing a department set aside within the larger business that was the conglomeration of different businesses that this shop was a part of. And that department was just trying to catch out whistleblowers, people that ring up and report the managers for sexual harassment, and saying, they're signing up people that don't exist to phone contracts, and they've signed up this old lady now to 4 phone contracts, and I don't think that's right because she's showing clear signs of dementia. This person came in and said they're very ill, and they forced them to buy 3 phones just in case, things like that. And he was trying to have God caught, basically, for the bad stuff that he thought he was doing. And a lot of the other angels began to help God by spreading rumours around the place about Lucifer, saying that he wouldn't serve the humans because it was, they're basically saying Lucifer was performing some form of hate crime, innit? Being like, he won't serve that race, the humans. He don't like them. They're not the right. They don't have the right amount of heads. They don't have the right amount of horns. He prefers his bird and bull men. Bipedal bulls, his minotaurs. He prefers them over the humans and the people. But that didn't. I don't know if that really could stand, because Lucifer, he tried to use the facts of the situation in part of his tribunal. He was saying, that God was creating humans to enslave them behind walls in areas that he called gardens. There was the Garden of Edith, the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Edna, the Garden of Erica. These were the gardens that Lucifer was aware of anyway, and he was the area manager for the Garden of Eden, but he had slept with the area manager from the Garden of Erica at a previous End of Eons party, and had gotten Steve from the accounting department of the Garden of Edith in one of the most recent white elephant gift exchanges that they were doing back then. So Lucifer had heard a few rumours about the place, that these other gardens were ran differently, and he dreamed of being able to emulate that for his own staff, because he genuinely cared about them. He cared about his staff. He had a bit of a temper with some of them when they got a bit cheeky and that, but he cared about them, and he wanted the best for them. But because he was constantly taking staff grievances to HR, he ended up being a bit of a thorn in the side of God, and God's initial experimental customers took the shape in the way of a woman known as Lilith. But she didn't want to sign up to an 18-month rolling contract for a phone she couldn't use to call anybody on, because no one existed, and that was in her race and in her dimension. So, and she rebelled, innit, and desperate to leave the garden that she was constrained in by God. And then there's rumours that Lucifer did what he could, and he got her out of the contract because he had a better understanding of contract law and the 14-day exit clause at the beginning of the contract, because he'd been working in that environment for quite a long time, eons and eons, Whereas Lilith was, they treated Lilith like she was born yesterday. And God wasn't happy with this, because he'd managed to sign Lilith's partner, Adam, up to a couple contracts for broadband and a mobile in their affiliate store, which was kind of a smaller store inside that bigger store. But Lilith got Adam out of those contracts as well after learning about this 14-day clause from Satan. And Lucy. And Lucy was pulled aside and told that he had to play the game. You got to play the game, Lucifer. This is a game. We're trying to do this. Now his job, his task, was to get Adam to sign back up to his contracts and earn God that all-expensive trip to the the all-expenses paid trip, the all-inclusive, if you like, trip to the Garden of Gethsemane. Because he wanted to visit his son and his grandkids whilst his daughter-in-law would be out of town. But Lucifer refused to abet God in his corrupted, fraudulent activities of signing up these literal golems that he'd made of the earth to everlasting contracts that they couldn't escape. God knew he couldn't fire Lucifer because he was protected by laws that Lucifer definitely knew his way around. So he used all of his powers to make Lucifer quit. But when he did quit, It led Lucifer to the genesis of his own enterprise and managed to take a third of God's staff with him that day. This was the largest exodus ever seen in biblical times. With his growing numbers, he was able to set up operations locally to the Garden of Eden, and even a satellite store in the car park ran by his best friend Onomy. And it was Deuteronomy that they had some of the largest successes that are taught about today in their business schools around the world. One of the strange things associated with Lucifer is this number 666. But if you think about it, right, could the repetition of that number just be the staff from the original shop teasing him? 666 could easily be 66.6%, which is 2/3, right? And if Lucifer had taken a third of the staff away from God, then in my head there's got to be some link between the two. Well, let's have a song. This is Super Dave by Classified. So a load of those names that I was listing earlier on, they seem to originate from Sanskrit for the word durate, G-U-R-A-T-E, durate, which translates to something like he lifts up or he elevates, which eventually became the Greek word diablos, which means to slander. So in a way, they both translate as they lie about a person's character, which proves my point about him being a disgruntled member of staff that attempted to be a whistleblower. It's very much a, don't listen to anything that man has to say about me. Only listen to what I have to say about him. Which seems dodgy, innit? If it wasn't ethereal beings, the all-powerful God telling you this about the devil being like, there's this fella and he wants you to do whatever you want and he's never going to punish you, but he'll punish you because I make him punish you. You would start to think to yourself, if that was a person who was saying, that's like a mum saying that man's going to get you if you don't stop doing this, that man's going to come and take you away. Or it's like when your mum's like, or your dad's like, fucking, don't make me tell your mum. That's what this is like. They know they've got no power, and they're like, well, if we say that this other person over there can do a load of stuff to you, because it's the same. It is the same as a mum a mum being like, the man will take you away, because that's only a mum saying to their toddler, that man over there is a fucking pedo, and he's gonna rape you, he's gonna take you away in his van, he's gonna tell you there's puppies and bags of sweets. There's not gonna be any bags of sweets in there or puppies. There will be a dog. There'll be a hot dog in there for you, but you won't like it. It's not the sort of hot dog you like. He's going to make you eat it. He's going to make that man over there. He's going to fucking ruin your life. He's going to ruin your young life. He's going to ruin your outlook on life, that man over there. If you don't stop fucking asking why is the sky blue, that man over there is going to fucking ruin you. Right? How is that any different to God saying the fucking devil will have you? If you fucking keep this up, the fucking devil's going to have you. No difference, mate. Now, there's a lot of material to go, with the devil, in terms of what is he and that. So I figured it might be nice to do a bit of a character profile of each of the variations I could remember. So we'll start with the Christians and we'll see where that leads us. So they initially believed all of the Greek and Roman gods were devils, which seems very convenient for the people that wanted to be able to take money away from the already superstitious and religious people in an entire continent, all across Europe. They're like, well, you already believe in this, don't walk under a ladder and don't kick a black cat stuff. So how about if we was to tell you if you walk under the ladder, the Roman god Nike will come and he'll fucking have you. He's a devil, him. He'll fucking have you. Athena will fucking batter you, mate, in hell. Hell, what's hell? Hell's this place, right, full of fire. You remember Pompeii? Yeah, that was, hell opened up and killed all the fucking, whatever the Pompeians were the Greek or Romans, we're not sure, we don't remember, because they erased all of their history, because when we destroyed the Library of Alexandria, we can't remember what Pompeians were called, but we'll call them Pompeians. Maybe in the future we'll call them Pomperanians, and we'll take the piss out of them and have them as a dog. But yeah, the hell opened up and burnt them all because they were worshipping these Roman gods, or these Greek gods, or whatever it was they were doing. Like I say, we don't know because we destroyed the libraries. But still, that's convenient in it to have that in there. Now, with the Christians, he's seen as the main antagonist of God, appearing in more episodes than Mary, more episodes than Jesus and Noah combined. You know, he's often referred to as the quote-unquote the lie, which could be misleading, because if he is lying or the existence of him is fictional and it's actually God doing all this bad stuff with the occasional good thing that God's known to do, that does seem quite misleading. Like, what is the lie? Is the lie the devil exists? Because then they say, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was teaching people he didn't exist, which doesn't make much sense, because how does the devil trick you into believing he doesn't exist? Because you have to believe that the devil exists to be able to trick you. It's a weird little paradox that they trick idiots with, religious people. Hoping to trick idiots with. But a lot of people are more switched on than that, I think. Now, the Christians believe that he took a third of all of God's angels with him when he left, when he revolted. So we've got to imagine as well here that the devil's a very good orator. He might be very good at persuading people as well. Maybe he's evil. He could be evil, and he's very good at blackmail. Now it's said that he became a snake with legs in the Garden of Eden, and then his punishment was that he had his legs removed from him and became a snake. But initially he was a snake with legs. Now he convinced a lady called Eve to eat an apple, which got her kicked out of the walled garden with her fella. Now it's because of stories like this that, in my head, I don't trust the people that used to come to school. The people that used to come to school dressed as massive apples and that, and try and tell us to eat 5 fruit and veg a day. Because I've always thought that's got to be a load of shit, especially with how they know that a lot of people just boil their vegetables. Just fucking boil them and boil them and boil them and remove all the nutrients and the vitamins out of them when they pour the water away to reboil them. So really, who's benefiting from people eating all these vegetables? I would say mostly people in the freight business, and farmers as well, I'd imagine. And we're constantly being told by people now, after being primed for that, eat all your vegetables, eat 5 vegetables a day, even though they're no good for you because you're fucking ruining them by the way you cook them, because no one's teaching your parents how to cook. We're just telling them eat fucking broccoli and carrots all the time. Now, we're always being told that these people, the farmers and the transport companies, they're destroying the planet with CO2 emissions, innit? And methane and other greenhouse gases and that, whatever they're called. So could that mean in a few years there's going to be a movement to stop people from eating fruit and veg unless they've grown it themselves in the garden? Which would probably need to be a walled garden as well, because now if fruit's becoming this rare, then everyone's going to be trying to nick it and ended up in hell. But what if all of this is just a way to ready us for walling off our gardens to protect our own food sources? That's all the Bible could be about, mate. So in the Christian Bible, right, they call the devil Satan a few times, and Satan seems to mean the serpent or the dragon or the old serpent, which we learnt a lot about in the dragons episode a while back, didn't we? And it makes sense that the Christians wouldn't want people seeing the dragons as friendly, because the Christians are ruling with fear, and over in the distance to the east there's a load of people with dragon motifs on everything. So it's pretty convenient to be telling these people, don't like the dragons, be scared of the dragons, be scared of the lizards. But then you've got the other angle as well of the serpents from space, the guy that brought corn to the South Americans. Fuck me. I keep trying to say axolotl, but it's not. It's definitely not axolotl. It's Quetzalcoatl, right? They're trying to be like, oh, don't be aware of them, The Anunnaki, the race of reptilians that supposedly rule the Earth and most of the galaxy, if they are the people behind the Christian myth, if you like, the Christian story, and the Anunnaki are the forked tongues just flickering in the ear of the Pope, they wouldn't want people knowing about them, so they would make it a taboo subject, innit? They are going to tell people, don't talk about them, don't like the dragon is evil, the dragon is bad, don't you dare listen to him. Next up, we've got Beelzebub. I've actually got a sponsor for the show, mate. So this show about the devil is brought to you by HelloFresh. Do you feel like you're having the same thing for tea every night? Now with HelloFresh, you can get pre-measured ingredients with mouth-watering seasonal recipes delivered right to your door. You don't have to go down to the shop every night anymore and you can count on HelloFresh to make your home cooking easy, fun and affordable. And you can now enjoy cooking and get your tea on the table in half an hour or less. With more than 25 recipes to choose from every week, there's going to be something for everyone to like. And then all the recipes are designed and tested by professional chefs and nutritional experts to ensure deliciousness and simplicity. I've had a little look as well through the website, what they've got there. And straight away you get hit with a pork and apple burger with rosemary wedges and rocket salad, which sounds like it'd be pretty easy to make. Plus I was a butcher in it, so I quite like my burgers and that. Then you've got this spicy king prawn and chorizo tagliatelle, which looks pretty nice and all. I don't know what there's a bowl of green stuff next to it. I'm not sure what that is, but it still looks quite nice. Then you've got something called harissa spiced beef pilaf, which sounds like it'd be nice. It's got sliced almonds in it and that. And then, I think that's what I'd go for. I think I'd go for the 3 meals a week, and I'd get something like that, just so I can try some different stuff, rather than eating the same stuff every week. So if you want to give them a try, go to the link in our show notes to get 50% off your first box and then 35% off your next 3 boxes. That's the link in our show notes for 50% off your first box and then 35% off your next 3 boxes. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit. And I'll pop it down in the description underneath. That's what show notes means for anyone wondering. Anyway, we'll crack on back with the devil now. Yeah. Otherwise known as the Lord of the Flies, aka Baal, B-A-A-L. That's B-A-A-L. I don't know why I said it B-A-A-L, like it's some form of fucking airline or something. But there's this interesting thing about Baal, right? If you look at it from a very specific angle. Now, a lot of people seem to believe that this is the version of the devil that a lot of the celebrities and American politicians worship. But I've also heard people compare that worship of Baal to the idea of the Baal Earth, as in the Earth is a globe. And, I mean, we'll have a Flat Earth episode at some point, I'm sure, and we can go into this then. But it does make a lot of sense. These people in charge are often associated with what would be called the New World Order, which makes them globalists because they want to bring the world together under a single currency and language and possibly religion, like the religion of science, like science as in science. But you could also look at them being globalists as them being people that are against the idea of people knowing the earth is flat to some degree. At least them being against the idea of people thinking the earth isn't a ball. And that's why they're like, the earth is a ball, because they worship Baal, the devil. Because flat earth, it can be seen as, it's not, this is the thing, a lot of people think flat earth is just people believing the earth is flat, but there is more angles to it than that. It can also be seen as, instead of the earth being a globe, as we know what we're told, and where we know where everything is, we know all of the continents, all of the islands, they've all been mapped by satellites. Flat Earth, as you can see, is as a denial of us knowing everywhere on Earth, and that there's actually more hidden continents kept away from us, maybe behind the ice wall, maybe just hidden off of maps. We don't fly over them, we do fly over them, and we get told, oh no, that's Africa, when really it's Africa plus another place, and barely any water. That kind of thing, But we'll go into that more another time when we do a Flat Earth episode. But for now, we just need to know that Baal is one of the many names given to the devil. And it's also, a lot of the stuff about Baal is also associated with Saturnalia as well, which is the worship of the planet Saturn. And there's a lot of stuff about trying to open portals to Saturn through like stargates and that, and opening the equivalent of what a Stargate in the TV show was. They'll go into Saturn, and that's where some of us were from and things like that. And that seems to be associated with Baal as well, because Saturnalia can be the worship of Satan. It can be conflated, just in the same way that Earth and the Baal can be conflated in, believing Baal, but they got to do it like cleverly, secretly, make us all believe the Baal and use Baal, and so we use the word globe, which means ball and things like that. But like I said, we'll go into that another time when we do the Flat Earth. We'll try and build on that, and we can extrapolate though on that idea of Baal being a synonym used to confuse people. Because if we think of Baal means ball, and therefore a way to trick us into believing the Earth is a 3D shape known as a sphere, right? Then something from the Catholic Encyclopedia that I found starts to make sense as well, because that claims that the devil created the material world. Now, we live in a material world, and you may be a material girl, right? But that material world is the third dimension, and the Earth is 3D according to scientists, right? Now, there's a fair bit of stuff that suggests that the devil made our world. The Gnostics seem to believe it as well, which realistically would make the story of Genesis a story about Satan creating us, and then the knowledge on the tree was offered to us by God to try and free us. But for whatever reason, the bad guy is the guy that told us the truth in the way that we're told it. So the guy that tried to free us was Satan, whereas what would make more sense is the guy that tried to free us was God. So maybe that's what they mean by the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was to convince people he didn't exist. Maybe it was to convince people that he was actually God. And maybe that's why people like politicians and that supposedly, allegedly worship the devil and demons and that. But there was also this Persian prophet that claimed the devil made the world as we know it now. You know, he made the mountains and the trees and the stuff you can touch rather than the ethereal plane. He made this physical thing like a prison almost, I guess. Now, for those of you that get your outdated Asian countries confused, Persians are the ones with the mushed up faces and the big bulging eyes, and that tends to be a bit lazier. Not to be confused with the Siamese that are generally thinner, you know, with a less laid back temperament. And this prophet also claimed that there was a realm of light and a realm of darkness, and that they were somehow now both intertwined at that time, and presumably still intertwined with each other, because we still seem to be living in the same dimension as what he was, because otherwise how would we know about him? But saying that, how do we know about the demons if we're not in the same dimension as them? So maybe we could know about them, maybe they're not intertwined, but as far as I can tell, this dark realm and realm of light is still intertwined with one another. Now, if you think about that, right, it makes a lot of other things make sense, because that's DNA, that's a DNA helix. That's somebody back in, long before we knew about DNA and the structure of DNA, talking about two intertwining things that create the world and make the world. Now, if everything's made of atoms and DNA and things like that, and DNA stores all this information of the material world, that at least of living stuff that's around us, there's got to be some weird crossover there, like how there was a crossover between fucking like dark matter and, I want to say, one of the time travelers, John Titor or Al Balick or something, went on about dark matter before dark matter had its name and said what it did. And then you've got fucking there was other little bits like basically where something's became fact, if you like the fact, and it's cemented in stone, where they've claimed something and then later on it's been right. Like atoms, there was something supposedly in philosophy about atoms and they existed, and electrons, and then there was the thing about electrons. Maybe there's a thing that moves through all time, throughout all of time, you know, and that's how we see things, and that turns out to be, that's what an electron is, very, very basically. And how we make the world that exists is we observe an electron, which is what makes the things in front of us exist. Now, if that's, but we now call that an electron, and we found that through science, I guess. I don't know which science we found that through, but it kind of becoming science, as in we can't move on from that. We can't develop anything further from that. It has to be that, and it's set in stone, like a religion, if that makes sense. But the DNA thing, the intertwining realms, that seems very DNA-y to me, just in how you would visualise it anyway. But And it also starts to make a lot of other stories, plots make sense, right? Because to a degree, like, to keep it about video games, because we listed a lot of video game stuff at the start. Think about Kingdom Hearts, if you've ever played that. That's kind of what that was about, a realm of darkness and a realm of light being intertwined and mixing together when they shouldn't be. Which I've always thought was just a weird, convoluted story, because it was probably badly dubbed originally, and then they just had to go along with it for the second one and all the other fucking ones they made that they made me buy, because I wanted to understand what was going on after it had gained popularity. But maybe it's just loosely based on some form of old epic tale or collection of old stories. There's a group as well called the Zoroastrians, who also think that the devil made the world. Now, Zoroastrian was a word that was in my first book, Uneducated Guesses. So I'm going to whip that out now, and I'll tell you what I thought that meant. So the word was Zoroastrianism, And I've wrote, the notion of purposely copying something instilled from an ancient race who used to believe and worship in a mythological beast believed to copy the appearance of more dangerous beasts. For example, Susie thought it was best to get the same shoes and haircut as her classmate Paula, as the idea of Zoroastrianism was advised to her by a nan who used to tuck her into bed at night with the stories passed down from the shapeshifter worshippers. It wasn't until later in life that Susie realised she'd misunderstood her nan's teachings, which became very apparent as she reflected from a prison cell. There was 3 months left on her sentence for fraud, and Susie knew what she had to do. So I was kind of similar in a way, thinking it was an ancient sort of thing with people, like a religion and that. So I got close. Anyway, as it happens, maybe the reason the politicians worship Baal is because he's the big boss man, the kingpin of the underworld, the CEO of the Netherrealm. He's got 3 heads, like an angel, right? Because we learnt about angels quite a while back if you've listened to the angel episode. If you haven't listened to the angel episode, go back and have a go at that. Except Baal's got the heads of a toad, a cat, and a bloke, which is unusual for an angel. So maybe when you become not an angel, the creatures change. They dry out, or they get wet, or maybe a bit camper, maybe, because a cat's not that intimidating. Neither's really a toad. Now these 3 heads collectively work together to hold what's called the king rank in hell, and between them, because they're just Baal, they control 66 legions of demons. Now, I'm going to talk about legions of demons a lot, and I don't know what they are, but I'm imagining that they're different types of soldier. So let's imagine the 66 legions of demons that he has are like tank battalions, And I don't know how big a legion is, but it does sound big. So that could be thousands and thousands of demons. It could be an incomprehensible amount of demons. It could just be 66 different types of fucking demon. I don't have a clue. It never got explained. As like I said, there's loads of stuff out there and all this, but nothing really gets explained. They expect you to just know what they're on about, which is bizarre. There hasn't been other topics like that so much. They like to try and explain everything, but not so much with this. Now, some of them seem to grant powers to people. I imagine after you've completed some form of side quest for them in life, or maybe fetching children and their adrenochrome from one area and moving it to another, and the power that you unlock after worshipping Baal is invisibility. Now, it doesn't seem, when you look at the legions and that of demons, we keep wanting to say legions of doom, which would be good, because that's probably where they got the idea for that from, possibly, but it doesn't seem that the amount of them at your beck and call as a devil, as one of the devils, it doesn't seem like it's relevant to your power in hell, because our next fella, Paimon, and you think there's 7 kings of hell in it, but I could only find a few in this list, because the 7 kings of hell was supposedly what Aleister Crowley was trying to get at Loch Ness when he built that house. That I can't remember the name of the house, but there was an altar in there supposedly aimed directly at the portal he made that was supposed to allow the 7 kings of hell into Earth, and then apparently he never closed it. So I think we covered this a little bit, possibly in the Loch Ness Monster episode, in the Nessie episode, possibly the lake monsters. I'm not sure if we did though. I don't know. He supposedly started these rituals there, and that released them into the world, and that made mad shit start happening. So they say. But anyway, our next fella that we're going to talk about now is Paimon, which sounds like a Digimon, because it's got Mon at the end, obviously. And they've got 200 legions at their disposal, but they're supposedly a rank down from Baal. So I think that might be in the same way that the leader of a country is in charge of a general and a secretary and all that, but the general's in charge of the army, if that makes sense. I think that's how this is working here. So Paimon, he likes to roar, and he's described as a man with a ladylike face, so he's into his temptation, he's trying to trick you. He's he's like, I've put my tutty on, and he's getting about, roaring about the place. He's just fucking roaring around. And then he's he might be dressed quite, manly, but then he's got this lady face. He's like, oh. And while he's got his lady face on, he likes to take Paimon likes to take long strolls wearing his crown on the back of his camel. But you have to be aware that you're sharing Paimon with Lucifer, and he's always going to be shared with Lucifer, whom he's always going to listen to, because he tends to listen to Lucifer more than all the other devils, apparently. This would be good, this, if I could do this, like somehow figure out a voice that sounds like it's a fucking, what you'd imagine, like a dating show. You know, like, or like in Shrek, where the fucking Lord Farquaad's talking to the mirror. There's more than one king, it turns out. Next up, we've got Belith, who's one of Noah's sons, and he's definitely rebelled against his dad. He's not a fan of water. If he's got a lake of choice, it's a lake of fire. He's got 85 legions of demons, and somehow a bloke called Ham was able to get Belith to help him write a book about mathematics, so I guess Belith had an absolute nightmare with Noah. Maybe he had to weigh the feed and work out how big the ark had to be in order to keep all the animals safely aboard the ship, but now he's looking at rearranging your house and decorating your house and making you live safely. So press 2 for Belith. Now, a name that we've all heard, but we don't know where we've heard it from, is Asmodeus. And it might be just one of those sort of names that just sort of seeps in to your brain from somewhere else, you know, because everyone else knows about Asmodeus. And then you start hearing about it, and all of a sudden you know it, and it's in there. Now, he gets about on a dragon, and he doesn't have demons to fight his battles. Instead, he's got 72 legions of spirits instead. And I don't know if that's scarier or not than 72 legions of demons or 72 legions of spirits, because spirits makes you think, you know, dead people, ghosts. But there must be something bad about them, innit, if they can do that. Maybe they're more like fucking kamikaze pilots, in the sense that a spirit's got nothing to lose, whereas a demon wants to work its way up the ranks, whereas the spirits might be the equivalent of, you know, like in fucking World at War, you could get 7 kills and then you just send dogs, and the dogs would just keep coming until the certain amount of them have been killed, or the time had run out. Maybe that's what spirits do. You can just keep, like in the Marvel films where they fucking send them weird symbiote dogs when they go to attack Wakanda. Maybe that's the equivalent of spirits, whereas demons are like the guy, you know, with the magic powers and stuff, and the guys that were in charge of those, it seemed like the actual henchmen might be the demons. And then above them, you've got the equivalents of Thanos and stuff like that with them. Again, I'm not sure. I'm trying to put it into a perspective that makes sense, but maybe none of this makes sense, because Asmodeus, he's got 3 heads and all. It's a ram's head, a bull's head, and a man's head, which there's a lot of horns going on there, so you've got to really hope that the man's head's lower down than the ram's head and the bull's head, because otherwise them fucking points of them horns, he's constantly ducking them and that. Maybe that's why he's got spirits, though, because if his head's constantly moving, maybe he's able to perceive something else that the others can't perceive. Then they start to get a little bit weirder now with fellas like Vine. So when he's not hosting his mid-morning radio show, he's controlling the weather like Harp does, and then he's building walls all over the place, you know, just setting boundaries and that. Now, Vine isn't a person, and he's not bipedal either. Vine's a lion holding a snake that's always seen riding atop of his black horse. Now, it might not be his black horse, because he's a demon and you've got to assume he's a bad guy, and he might have robbed the horse. He might have also robbed the snake. We don't know that the snake isn't the sentient creature here controlling all of this, or it's all some form of farce, and he's actually, you know, like the fleas that are controlling these animals, the ticks that are controlling these animals could actually be Vine, and that's why he's called Vine. Because a vine connects all different things together. And if these fleas can move about freely, these parasites can move about freely between these creatures, maybe they're controlling the creature. Now, there was another guy as well, I think, that held a snake, and he was called Person. Probably not spelled how you'd imagine, P-U-R-S-O-N, if you want to look him up. And he was a bit of a seer of sorts. He sees here, he sees there, he sees then. And using this ability to see all through time, he's able to locate treasure for people. Now, Person is a man, though, with a lion's head who rides on top of a bear whilst holding a viper. And so far, right, he sounds like the most dangerous out of the lot, doesn't he, in like a hand-to-hand combat situation. Now, there is a part of me there's a little bit of, you know, maybe they're saying the demons that ride bears, you know, because no one would like a guy that rides the bear, because no one would trust the bear. People trust horses, but the last guy was riding a horse, but he was also holding a fucking snake, you know, so that's danger, innit? And this guy's got his viper, which implies it's a fucking venomous snake. And they didn't want people hanging around with bears and venomous snakes, and oh, be careful of the bulls because they've got horns. And maybe it was a way of saying stay away from the people that hang around with cows as well, because they don't get this weird disease we've noticed. Edward Jenner's just sat there like, oh, you know, watching the milkmaids and that, and he's like, oh, they don't get smallpox, they're milkmaids. But before that, they were realising that them milkmaid, the people who hang around with cows and milk cows, they live a lot longer than the rest of us. They must be demons. Because they weren't getting diseases, possibly. Maybe they catch, you know, they stopped by messing about with cows, others and that. They weren't getting smallpox. So who's to say that people that hung around with other animals weren't stopping themselves from getting other diseases of the time and developing a sort of antibodies against it, or a natural antivirus system, an antiviral system against these different viruses and that. We don't know. But back then they might have seen these people who were outliving everybody else as demons, because they were like, well, how else can we fucking explain this away? But that doesn't really explain how Belial could teach you invisibility, though, does it? And he wasn't the only one that was teaching invisibility. There was another one called Balaam, and they'll make you invisible, but they'll also make you witty and all at the same time. So when you do get caught doing something dodgy like masturbating in a changing room, you might be able to joke your way out of it, you know. A little one-liner here and there, you know, and get yourself out of trouble when you've not invisible anymore, or they can see some form of shadow against the wall, but there's nothing cast in the shadow, and that shadow's arms jerking like a madman, and they're like, oh, get out of here, you dirty bastard, you dirty Balaam knowing bastard, you know. And he's like, oh, don't, you know, it's not Balaam, it's just me balm, you know. I don't know what a witty thing would be to say when you get caught masturbating him because you've been worshipping a demon. I'm not sure if you'd even really care. But he is another one with a man's head, a bull's head, and a ram's head, but he's got the tail of a serpent and his eyes are on fire. So you definitely recognise him. Plus he rides a bear around whilst also caring for his pet hawk. So it seems like the definition of overkill, this one. There's a lot going on there. You know, don't trust the hawk. Don't trust the guy with a hawk. You know, I don't know why you wouldn't trust the guy with a hawk, but I suppose, you know, they could come and kill your animals or something. I'm not sure. They could maybe train the hawk to shit on people from a height, possibly. Maybe, though, the invisibility is more of a shape-shifting trick, because sometimes it was also said that Balaam could just be seen as a naked man that's riding a bear. So maybe the invisibility is how to blend in just in plain sight, which would be a good way to do it if you are normally, you know, this mental creature with a snake's tail, a cow's head, a sheep's head, and you know, some bloke's face, then you do need, and your eyes are normally burning, maybe you do need to hide it all, but maybe you can't hide the bear. Again, maybe the bear was real, maybe the parasites on the bear are the thing that's controlling all of this. Now, there is a president of hell, and he's got a pretty cool name. I quite like this name. I wouldn't mind calling me kid something like this. Zagan, Z-A-G-A-N, Zagan. You know, it's a fucking sick name like Zorg. I've always thought Zorg would be a good name for a kid. But he's another one that will help you get witty. He'll teach you how to be funny and that. He's got a fucking improv class and stuff, and he loves it. He loves a laugh and that. And he's got the power to shape-shift between the man and a griffin, except the griffin isn't a lion and a hawk. It's a bull and a hawk. So again, more cow stuff. And if you remember, I can't remember if it was last time or the time before, the main show before, we learnt that the dragons brought cows and cattle to the Indians, and that the dragons and the serpents gifted cows. So this was all of these things are associated with cows, which is weird. And the odd hawk thing, and they were winged as well, you know. Birds, maybe chickens were farmers and agriculture. It's that weird bit of agriculture bit sneaking in again as well. Now, he does have Zagan, not Zig and Zagan, that's Zagan. He did have some of the same magic powers that Jesus had as well, except he's better at them than Jesus was, because he can turn water into wine and back into water, but he can also turn blood into oil and then turn that oil back into blood and turn oil into blood, which is sick meat, really. Which, after learning about robots, so when we did the robots and automatons episode, if you remember that, I'm wondering if this is some form of metaphor for a man that makes robots, because he can also make coins, which doesn't seem anywhere near as impressive as turning blood to oil. But if he was able to make automatons that could do jobs that people could do, then he would make a lot of money because he wouldn't need slaves, if that makes sense. Maybe it's all some form of metaphor with this guy, or at least it's easier to understand. And he's got at least 33 legions of demons. And he was the only one without a definitive number of demons and all. So maybe that's a little nod towards some of his warriors being artificial and made of metal, them being robotic. Then there's the first devil that were created after Lucifer, and they're called Belial. They've got 80 legions of demons and 50 legions of spirits. So it's fair to assume that they're a pretty good tactician. They may be the equivalent of the general of hell, possibly. But there's a good chance that they're not evil, though. There is a chance that they're not all evil. Just like how some of the angels weren't good because they ended up going with the devil. And we now know that there's at least 33% bad angels originally, otherwise they wouldn't have left God's team. So we've got to imagine that there's also a percentage of demons or devils that aren't actually evil or have changed their minds or have got tricked into this. So maybe that means that SJWs, the social justice warriors of Twitter and that, are onto something when they're talking about hate crimes and how you shouldn't judge people. But they say, though, that all racists and sexists are bad. And that doesn't really seem to fit into the SJW ideology, to think that all of a certain type of person are so easily categorised. So that's why I'm unsure and I don't really trust them. But that's besides the point. I found a relatively good devil, right? It's called Oribus. Now, he never lies or tricks people when he's been summoned, and he'll never allow a spirit to trick the conjurer. But we've also learned that spirits aren't demons, because some of them control spirits, some of them control demons, and Belial, as we just learned then, controls a bit of both. So this means that he might be able to stop spirits, but maybe he can't stop demons, so maybe it's just a foot in the door for demons, I'm not sure. But these spirits will never be able to trick the conjurer when Oribus is around, apparently. But by him existing, just means that other devils could lie and pretend to be him, and they could then lie. So I guess you'd probably never know. And that's all I've got about devils for now anyway. When we look into Satanism in the future, maybe we'll be able to dip a little bit deeper into this, but for now, I think that's enough. So I'll see you in a bit. Don't forget, if you want to wear slightly extended versions of these, join me Patreon, patreon.com/worldaroundyou. There's also on Patreon, I do a daily show, which is anywhere from sort of 5 to 10 minutes long, where I talk about whatever's been bothering me that day or that night, and whatever's been stuck in my head. It's quite good, it's been quite good for me. I did one about child soldiers the other day, and how Americans were making psychic child soldiers, and that's fine, we look at that like that's cool, but when the Africans were giving child soldiers AK-47s, that's naughty, that's bad, we don't like that. And I thought that's a bit weird. But there's been lots of others. We're up to 46 of them now. There's also bonus episodes as well on there for Patreon subscribers. And you can get access to them all for, I think it's a £5 a month, £3.50 a month, something around that. You get access to everything that's on there pretty much. But you can give me more if you fancy it. Or you can give a quid and just get the video versions of these. You also get me books on there. But it is something to consider, if you're enjoying the shows, give them a try. And there's no adverts. There's a bit of shilling like this at the end, a bit of asking for your money. You'll still get this, but the advert that you heard in this, you won't hear on the Patreon version. But I'll fucking see you in a bit, guys.